And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines in simple keywords with Adam joining us on the line. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena. How are you doing?
Just fine. It seems like we've survived the rain yesterday. The downpour was intense.
It was. I had a round of golf cancelled because of it, which I wasn't happy about. But what can you do, eh? What can you
What
do?
can you do? You acclimate. It seems like today's conditions will be slightly milder as far as downpour goes, but once the rain
Yeah.
passes, it'll also be hot. So brace yourselves.
Yeah, it is. We haven't even reached August, and it already feels like, well, before the rain anyway, it felt like we were in a kind of mid-August. But
Yeah.
yeah, still more heat to come, which yeah, I'm kind of enjoying the rain at the moment because it is making the weather a bit slightly cooler. I would rather have rain than,
Mm.
sweltering heat.
We'll take a look at what kind of damages were caused by the heavy rain yesterday, and also heat-related illnesses is a topic we'll be discussing more in detail in our second hour as well. That's a preview for the entire show, apparently. All right, let's jump into our keyword news portion of the day. This is our first pick of the day.
Big step.
So the Bank of Korea raised the base interest rate by a historic 50 basis points to 2.25%. Can you run us through the details?
Sure, it was a unanimous decision aimed at taming runaway inflation, of course, and marked the BOK's first big step rate hike ever. The BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong hinted at additional rate hikes as well in this year's remaining rate-setting meetings, which will be held in September, November, and December. Whether they will also be half a percentage point rises remains to be seen. Now, it's also the sixth rise in borrowing costs since August last year, and it's also the first time the BOK increased the rate 3 times in a row as well, which included quarter percentage point rises that happened in April and May. Korea has been grappling, of course, with this fast rising inflation pressure amid soaring energy and commodity prices. There have been caused by rebounding demand from the pandemic, protracted supply chain disruptions, rather, that have been exacerbated, of course, by the Ukraine conflict. Now, the country's consumer prices, which is a key gauge of inflation, soared 6% last month from a year earlier. It was the sharpest price increase since the Asian financial crisis in '98. And the government expects inflation will be under upward pressure and stay in the 6% range for the time being, unfortunately. So they're not really seeing any hopes for that much of a drastic drop in inflation. And the rate hike also comes as the US dollar is getting stronger and the market expects a more hawkish monetary policy to grapple with the plunging Korean won, which is widening trade deficits and also accelerating outflow of foreign capital as well, which of course could be exacerbated if the Fed raises rates even further. More foreign investors, of course, also may pull out of Korea in search of kind of safe haven assets. If the interest rate gap between Korea and the US is reversed, that will depend, of course, on the outcome of the Fed's rate-setting meeting, which will be held July 26th to the 27th.
All right, let's turn our attention to what's happening in the U.S. On a related note, this is our second keyword of the day.
Record inflation.
So over in the United States, inflation rose more than the projected forecast in the month of June, hitting a fresh 40-year high. Subsequently, U.S. stocks and oil fell Tuesday as, of course, investors were awaiting this fresh inflation data. What's the latest on this front?
Right. Well, U.S. consumer prices jumped by over 9% on year, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it marks the fastest year-on-year increase since November 1981. And now, economists had estimated an 8.8% increase, so it is slightly above that by 3 percentage points. Now, prices jumped another 1.3% on month in June, following a 1% rise in May. Much of the June increase was driven by a jump in gasoline prices, which are up nearly 60% over the year. Record high gas prices last month, with the national average topping $5 a gallon across the country, was also reported. Overall, energy prices rose by just over 41.5% on year. But, of course, the increases were felt across all categories, including food and and other kind of daily necessities. And this opens the door, of course, for the Fed to potentially raise interest rates again by a full percentage point this month, apparently, according to some analysts. Fed officials abandoned previously laid plans to deliver a half-point raise instead implemented the first 0.75 percentage point increase since 1994. President Joe Biden said the June CPI inflation reading was unacceptably high, but noted that it is also out of date. And he cited gas prices being lowered in the last 30 days. We mentioned yesterday gasoline and crude oil prices now below $100 per barrel. But of course, that is always subject to change considering how volatile the market is at the moment. And Biden also reiterated that tackling inflation is his top priority. Some economists have held out hope that inflation might be reaching or nearing a short-term peak. But of course, there are mixed reactions and opinions on that as well. So do take these analysis with a bit of a grain of salt.
All right, let's turn our attention to our COVID-19 coverage of the day. This is our third keyword.
Fourth shots.
So the government has announced some measures to try to tackle the recent surge in COVID-19 infections. Tell us the details on this fourth shot.
Right. Well, the government will expand eligibility for the fourth COVID-19 vaccine shot to people aged 50 and older, as well as people aged 18 and older who have underlying health conditions. Now, currently people aged 60 and older and people who have an immune disorder are eligible for these fourth shots. Now, the move comes as the nation, of course, is facing what is a kind of a virus resurgence driven by this Omicron strain being called BA.5. Now, the government will also, meanwhile, maintain this 7-day quarantine for people who are infected. By the end of this month, the government will expand the number of what's known as one-stop COVID-19 treatment centers to 10,000. There are currently just over 6,000. So those numbers will increase. Now, the centers are where people can just take virus tests. They can also get in-person medical care services and receive antiviral drugs as well. Now, social distancing rules were unchanged, though the Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the government will review such curves in the case this virus situation sees what he called a grave change. He didn't really specify the criteria of what that grave change could be in terms of kind of daily infection numbers and whatnot. Meanwhile, President Yoon Suk-yeol, he got his fourth vaccine dose yesterday and encouraged others to also get vaccinated. He certainly falls into that demographic for the fourth dose. And he also reassured people that the government will secure enough COVID treatments as well. The government says it already has enough, but the government is saying it'll secure more if needed.
Okay, that's meant for inoculations, right? And also it's about hospital beds securing enough. So if there is a resurgence, we are capable of coping with it. With that, let's turn our attention to our fourth, rather divisive keyword of the day.
Repatriation controversy.
So the Yoon administration has vowed to uncover the truth behind the repatriation of 2 North Korean fishermen back in 2019. They believe it was done against their will by the Moon government, citing human rights violations. What's the latest?
Yeah, this is a bit of a delicate issue. A lot of controversy surrounding it. Now, the presidential office said the repatriation of these 2 North Korean fishermen in 2019 constituted what it called a crime against international law and the Constitution if the 2 men were found to be sent back against their will. This all came after photos released by the Unification Ministry on Tuesday appeared to show the fishermen resisting, or one of the fishermen rather, resisting the repatriation at the Truce village of Panmunjom. Showed pictures of one of them dragging their feet and falling to the ground. The other one seemed to be complying with the instructions, but these are just photos. Now, the presidential spokesperson, Kang In-sun, told reporters that the images seen in the photos are totally at odds with the former Moon administration's explanations that they had no intention of defecting to the south. Now, she said the new government will fully determine the truth behind this case. Now, the 2 fishermen crossed the maritime border on November 2nd, 2019. They were captured by the South Korean Navy. The pair were sent back to North Korea 5 days after they were captured, so shortly after. At the time, the Moon administration said the pair did not want to stay in the South, apparently, according to them. Now, it also cited they were not protected by Article 9 of what's known as the North Korean Defectors Act because they murdered 16 fellow crew members. Now, the two fishermen did not undergo, interestingly, a formal criminal investigation or trial before they were returned to the North. That's also another area of controversy. Now, the release of the photo sparks rage, of course, from North Korean defectors and human rights groups in South Korea who believe Moon was trying to curry favor with Pyongyang, and they all calling on former President Moon Jae-in and members of his administration to be referred even to the International Criminal Court. And of course, the issue is also causing more arguments and risks between political parties, with the PPP, for example, setting up their own fact-finding task force of their own, and the DP kind of defending the Moon administration as well.
Right. The DP is saying that maybe the PPP is politically charging the issue. The PPP is saying it is definitely focused on the human rights violations. As you can see, the nature of the conversation is pretty sensitive, but we'll keep close tabs on the updates. Finally, on to the weather updates. We'll get to our fifth keyword of the day.
Heavy rain.
So heavy rain alerts were issued again for parts of the central region yesterday. If you're driving around the city of Seoul and surrounding areas, it poured down hard in the afternoon. It caused small and large-scale damages. How bad was it?
Yeah, it didn't seem to last that long. Well, it did much of the afternoon. It kind of died down a little bit in the evening. But yeah, man, did it pour down. I mean, I saw a lot of one restaurant that I went to yesterday had a row of buckets because the roof was leaking, and it certainly did cause a lot of problems in the central region. And this is because the annual monsoon season isn't over just yet. There are a few days left of rain. And if we go to yesterday's amount, there were 30 to 50 millimeters of rain falling per hour. There are also a number of traffic accidents being reported as well, including the collapse of a 4-ton truck in Wonju in Gangwon-do province, which injured 3 people, both severely and slightly. Gwangmyeong KTX station was also partly flooded because of a leak from a construction work that was being conducted nearby. And now in Seoul, Kumcheongu office station on line 1 was flooded, causing delays in trains that were bound for Suwon. There were also reports of flooding in buildings across the central regions and the capital area. Some apartments also faced power outages as well because of the heavy rain. And also, there are reports of strong winds in some areas as well, including Paju, which caused some trees to fall over as well. Authorities are warning of potential landslides. They are urging the public to avoid the mountains as well. Just because the rain is over doesn't mean the risk is gone. There are also risks after the rain. But rain is still forecast to continue sporadically, though, over the next few days. They might come in the afternoon or in the evening. So do check the weather forecast wherever you are located.
That's right. Radio updates come in regularly. So I don't know, maybe keep Arirang Radio close throughout the day. Thank you so much, Adam, for today's coverage. Stay dry and we'll speak to you again tomorrow.
You too. Stay dry. See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.